And again, that was Walter Trout, Unspoiled by Progress. They call us working class.
And you're listening to Voices at Work right here on KPFT 90.1 in Houston, 89.5 in Galveston, and now in Huntsville, 89.7, and on the World Wide Web, kpft.org. We have Marc McDonald on the line. Marc McDonald is an award-winning journalist who worked for 15 years for several Texas newspapers, including the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, before he quit his day job and set up shop in cyberspace in 1995. McDonald's articles have appeared in a number of popular progressive websites, including BuzzFlash.com, Crooks and Liars, and Salon.com. McDonald's web articles have also been featured and reviewed by various national and international media, including CNN Headline News, the BBC, Fox News, The Washington Post, USA Today, and many more. Welcome to the show, Marc.
I'm glad to be here.
It's good to have you. Yeah, that's pretty impressive. You know, BuzzFlash, Crooks and Liars, those are some of my favorite internet sites. I go to them every day. And you keep good company, put it that way.
Yes, thank you.
But the name of your actual blog is beggarscanbechoosers.com.
Yes.
That's an interesting title for a website. How'd you come to that title?
I just like the sound of the phrase. I figured that we the people, no matter how bad things get, ordinary people, we can choose what type of government we want.
Mm-hmm.
Like a million heads are better than one, like John Lennon once said. But actually, after I had run this blog for a couple of years, I got to thinking a Republican would probably look at that and think that I was trying to make some sort of pull yourself up by your bootstrap statement, which was the last thing I intended with the title of the blog. So I guess it just depends on if you're a progressive or a conservative, how you would interpret the title.
Right. and I guess since I'm a progressive, I interpreted it a certain way, and it seems that a lot of Republicans, conservatives, come at working class, working poor, people that work but don't make much money, and they look at us as beggars,
right.
and they think that we should just be happy for whatever we've got. Just be glad you've got that, and that we shouldn't be able to, vote for socialistic programs, vote for Medicare and Medicaid, vote for politicians who actually want to help people unemployed.
Right.
So that's kind of the way I took it, it's an interesting title, and I think it's a good choice. I kind of like it.
Thank you. And according to Republicans, if you're a paramedic and you're making like $30,000 a year, you're not successful. But if you're Paris Hilton and you make $100 million a year, you're successful just because you're rich.
Yeah, it's funny how that works. Yeah,
I'm unclear as to exactly what Paris Hilton's contribution to society is. But
I think she came out of the right pair of thighs.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, she walks around with a dog most of the time, just taking pictures and
just being wealthy elite.
Yes, just being rich and having her own TV show. And you're right, a lot of people call that, because you have money, successful. She
must have earned it, because that's the myth that we're all taught to believe. There's a lot of myths, and let's get to this article, how unions make a nation competitive. And you open the article with a statement that even on progressive radio show, I get, several times a year, progressives that say maybe unions were needed back in the 19th century era of robber barons, but these days unions are a dinosaur. They're no longer needed. That is something that I have to deal with constantly, even from progressives. Right.
Yeah, I'm always surprised at all the Democrats and so-called progressives I talk to that, they're not supportive of organized labor.
And they bought into this myth. The premise of the article, right in the title, is that unions make a nation competitive. The myth is that in what corporations and the corporate media put out there is that unions make a company and a nation less competitive.
Yes.
And they like to use the term flexibility. Well, with the union contract, we don't have flexibility. Talk a little bit about what it is you found and how unions actually make a nation competitive.
Yes, I think a lot of people, even if they support unions, they generally believe that it's the good thing about unions is that it gives workers a greater voice and a chance at making better wages. And I would like to see the progressive movement increasingly start pointing out that it goes beyond that. Unions make a nation competitive, and as Exhibit A, you can look to some of the world's most heavily unionized countries like Germany and Japan, and they're certainly the most competitive nations on earth. If you define competitiveness by the fact that they have gigantic trade surpluses year after year after year, personally, I never have understood why free market economists in the U.S. can get away with saying that the U.S. is competitive at all if we have a gigantic trade deficit. I mean, it seems to me like the very definition of competitiveness is, how well you're doing on exporting products. And if, the U.S. last year, I think, had a $700 billion trade deficit, which is by far the largest deficit that any country has ever recorded. And it just seems to me like we could learn a thing or two by looking at countries like Germany and Japan that are, still manufacturing high-tech products, and their products are in demand all over the world. And they're heavily unionized. Mm-hmm. So these free market economists that are saying, unions are a recipe for disaster and that they'll make a nation less competitive, they're just not living in the real world. They need to come down out of their ivory towers and take a look at what's actually going on in the real world. You've got a country like Germany that is basically a living laboratory of what a nation might be if it had never undergone the Reagan-Thatcher revolution, mm-hmm. like America and Britain did. Germany never had a Reagan or a Thatcher, and so as a result, they still have, strong unions. They still have, a healthy manufacturing base. They make high-tech products that are in heavy demand all over the world. Mm-hmm. And while countries like the U.S. are running scared of China, Germany regards China as an opportunity, not a threat, because German products like Porsche automobiles and Mercedes and Audi and these various high-tech products are in heavy demand in China. So Germany is exporting all over the world at a time when the U.S. has basically lost its manufacturing base.
Well, that was part of the whole NAFTA and all these horrible trade agreements. That's what they sold us on. I didn't buy into it, but I know a lot of people that did. That we'll sell all these goods to China if we take their goods, and it'll be beneficial to everybody. And it didn't work out that way because like you say, they started forcing our companies, our factories, our workers to compete with Mexican wages, El Salvador, and then eventually China. They did it with textiles, they did it with auto parts, many different things. But, in here recently they had a lot of Republicans were blaming the auto workers, for having to get bailed out recently, blaming the union and the workers for that, when they had absolutely nothing to do with it, saying that their benefits were too good. Speak a little bit about, because in the article you mentioned not only is it heavily unionized, not only do they have good union contracts, but they also have good labor law.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yes, they have in both countries like Germany and Japan, actually in most of continental Europe, there are strong labor laws to back up unions. It's one thing to have unions, but it's quite another to have labor laws that actually support the unions. And from what I've found in my research, the labor laws in places like continental Europe and in Japan encourage labor and management to work together for the benefit of the economy. Whereas in the U.S., unions and management are constantly in conflict, and I think that's the way the powers that be want it to be. Mm-hmm. But it seems to me like in the U.S. example, the only people who really benefit are CEOs who currently make something like, your typical CEO makes 500 times what the average rank and file worker makes. Now, that sort of multiple is just unheard of in Germany and Japan. In Japan, I think that multiple, the average CEO makes no more than 15 times what the average worker makes. Mm-hmm. The Americans get used to these incredible income disparities that if they happened in some place like continental Europe, people would take to the streets. They wouldn't accept this. And Americans have been so beaten down over the years that we've just become apathetic or we're fearful of trying to organize because we're afraid we're going to get fired. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I wonder, is this America or is this, Stalinist Russia? Stalinist Russia was a place where everyone was fearful all the time. And it seems to me like, a lot of Americans are fearful. We're afraid to organize. We're afraid to speak out. It's kind of scary, frankly.
You're absolutely right.
Mark, I like to point out another thing in your article, which is very interesting. The long-term effect that these two countries, Germany and Japan, take planning for their future. They're forced to look at a long-term plan because it's extremely difficult to lay off staff, where in the United States, you mentioned everything's looked at in quarters. Just, right. They're short-sighted.
Yes, if you... Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Well, if you listen to any free market economists, and sometimes I think the only economists that get a good paycheck in America are the ones that tell corporate America what they want to hear. If you're a pro-union economist, you're probably not going to get a gig anywhere.
Right.
But it just seems to me that if you have a law like they have in continental Europe and in Japan that basically makes mass layoffs very difficult, if not impossible, what that does, in effect, is it disciplines corporations and it forces them to take a very long-term view over the next 10 or 20 years. And that's one reason why you see in places like Germany and Japan, they're always able to outcompete U.S. corporations because they're planning, decades ahead. And like today, they're working on the industries of the future. Like Germany is one of the big places where you see innovations taking place in green technology, which is going to be huge. It's big now, but it's going to be even bigger in the decades to come. Mm-hmm. And Japan is also a big player in industries like that. And so I think that, having laws that encourage corporations to keep their workforces, if you listen to any free market economists, they'll say that's a recipe for economic decline. And I think that the opposite case could be made, that it helps make a country more competitive. Not to mention the fact that when corporations know that they're going to have, thousands of workers on their books for decades to come, it encourages them to spend more money on training. One big problem with American competitiveness is U.S. corporations consider training a dubious investment.
Right.
They're afraid to spend much on training because, for all they know, they're going to be laying off these people next year or whenever.
Well, and that's a really good point because, like I say, a lot of companies, if you're not already trained, if you're not already working in the job that they want you for, then they're less likely to take you because they're unwilling to train. And that doesn't increase the supply of very skilled individuals. That just moves them from one place to another. It doesn't increase the supply so that we as a nation rise up and increase our skill levels. And also the health of the workers, again, when you're talking, you're going to be keeping them for decades, making sure they have good health care means that they're going to, be able to be more productive for longer.
Right.
And you also mentioned the it's hard for us to compare apples to apples, because in Germany and Japan, right here in the United States, you're lucky if you get paid sick days. You're lucky if you get a 2-week paid vacation. That's considered, wow, that's a good gig. But how does that compare with Germany and Japan?
Well, a lot of people think that the conventional wisdom over the years has been that Japan performed better than the U.S. since World War II, because the Japanese are famously industrial. They're hard workers. They work longer hours than Americans do. That may have been true like 50 years ago, but it's no longer true now. I know a lot of Americans aren't aware of that, but there was a book that was released a few years ago called The Overworked American, The Unexpected Decline of Leisure. It was written by a Harvard scholar named Juliet Score, and she pointed out that Americans actually work the longest hours in the entire industrialized world. We work something like several hundred hours more than continental Europeans or Japanese. So that's a stereotype. The Japanese are building more cars than we are simply because they're working longer hours. It's just no longer the case. It may have been decades ago. But you mentioned earlier about how economists are always blasting the unions in Detroit and saying that's the cause of Detroit's decline. But what they never point out is that Detroit has declined, but the jobs that they've lost has not been to low-wage, non-union countries like Mexico. We've lost market share to countries like Germany and Japan, which are even more heavily unionized than America is.
Good point.
Well, Mark, I just want to make a point. We all talk about the American dream, and for somehow this term has gotten just people envision it as the American dream. You just have to be a millionaire or billionaire to conquer that American dream. But it should be that everybody, no matter what level you're on, can buy a home, have a good wage, have a vacation, spend time with their family, get health care. I mean, the American dream shouldn't be that hard to obtain. Everybody should have the right to go to work, make a good living, spend time with their family, retire. But it just seems like nowadays the American dream is that you have to work,
till you die.
Yeah, till you die, but work long hours, just to own a home. Or it just seems like we've just lost our vision here in America.
Yeah, and back in the 1950s, when 30% of the workforce was unionized, we had the American dream. The unions, they brought us the 40-hour week, they brought us a strong middle class. And today, people are working harder than ever, and they're not even able to make ends meet. They have to go deeply into debt just to attempt to live a decent life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I read that deal about German workers getting 6 weeks paid vacation, I got to tell you, I'm jealous as hell. 6 weeks.
Incidentally, that's minimum. Everyone gets a minimum of 6 weeks. The average is 8 weeks. That is not particularly unusual in continental Europe.
And just to point out, the U.S. is the only industrialized nation without national paid parental leave benefit, and that's something that I can't believe the United States still doesn't have today.
Yeah, it's just amazing how, even our progressive party in the U.S., the Democrats, even they're not focusing on this. These are issues that aren't even being discussed, much less implemented. I personally am kind of pessimistic that we're going to see much done in this area, but one thing that I would like to do is at least inform people. People should at least be made aware of the fact that unions, far from being, economic problem, they're actually a good thing for a nation's economy.
Absolutely. It's a stabilizing force, and we're just about out of time. I want to thank you for writing the article, and I want to encourage everybody to go read the article because we have to fight the incorrect myths out there with real facts. The unions help stabilize the country and a company, and you can check them out. bloggerscanbechoosers.com is
Beggars.
website.
You said bloggers.
Bloggers. I mean, the blog site, Beggars Can Be Choosers. Oh, good catch.
BeggarsCanBeChoosers.com, yes.
Well, thank you for joining us, Mark.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Have a good night. We were speaking with Marc McDonald, award-winning journalist. His latest piece titled How Unions Make a Nation Competitive. And again, his blog, BeggarsCanBeChoosers.com.
And that's all for this week. Until next week, this is Ron.
This is Christine.
For Monica, Joseph, and Robert, and
the
Shadow
puppy.
the puppy. Peace and solidarity, brothers and sisters.
Have a good week.
We are union. We face the fights ahead. We are union. We are union. Share this common thread. We are union. In our hearts and in our heads. We are union. We face the fights ahead. We are union.
KPFT is pleased to announce new programming. Now with an HD radio receiver, you can get KPFT's great music, news, and public affairs with a richer, crisper sound on HD1. On KPFT HD2, listen to Rice University Radio with the unique programming that made KTRU a gem on the dial. On KPFT HD3, you'll hear your favorites in new time slots, including Democracy Now!, Al Jazeera English, Uprising, Explorations, Alternative Radio, and more. HD radio allows you to hear multiple programs through additional digital channels. The sound is crisper than FM, and your choices are expanded. Visit kpft.org to learn more about HD radio broadcasting and program schedules. This is commercial-free, listener-sponsored Pacifica Radio, 90.1 FM and HD1, and now alternative programming on HD2 and 3. KPFT, Houston. Did you know you can find KPFT on the social networking sites Twitter and Facebook? You certainly can, and we'd love you to add us as a friend and get us connected with friends of yours. Join our fan page and check out a special video message